Video, if anyone was to have any interest in this, it is on YouTube of the Sunday school classes. It's under Guy Tatum's Sunday school class if anybody wants to Google it to see. I don't know how quick I'll get this one today's on, but they're there for Mama, but you can share and see them as well. Just a little FYI regarding where we're at in this. As I said previously, that I'm not teaching per se the book of Revelation. I'm teaching about the last days. And last week's may not have been as exciting to you as the Antichrist and Battle of Armageddon and things like that. And today's will be another one potentially like that, because we're going to be discussing today about the Davidic covenant. All of this has to do with the last days. As we have an understanding of those things, it helps us to understand more about the last days. There have been preachers that say we really don't need the Old Testament, but you need the Old Testament to learn a lot about what the New Testament's about. It's said by those who have the ability to figure this out that within the Old Testament, there are between 500 and 600 prophecies that relate to the last days. So that's not an insignificant number. 500 to 600 prophecies in the Old Testament relate to the last days. So I'll try not to bore you with this, but just as a reminder, last week we discussed the Abrahamic covenant. And the purpose of that, just to remind you, is that God chose Abram, who changed his name to Abraham, to create a people that would worship him and change the world by their lifestyle and them worshiping the one true God. They would be like missionaries or evangelists to the Gentile world, which is everyone but Jews. And so God was choosing Abram and making a covenant with him that he would use them. They would be his chosen people for the purpose of changing the world instead of him destroying the world with a flood as mankind continually become more corrupt. And so we thank God for that. So today we're going to be discussing the one considering King David and the covenant God made with David. We read of that in 2 Samuel chapter 7. You can make a note, or if you just want to. I'll read fairly quickly. I'll give you just a minute. 2 Samuel chapter 7. And I'll read 16 verses, but hang with me because all of them are important. Is that? That would be me. Okay.
Blue lights on.
All right. So today is really another history lesson. Verse 1 of chapter 7. When King David was settled in his palace and the Lord had given him rest from all the surrounding enemies, the king summoned Nathan the prophet. Look, David said, I am living in a beautiful cedar palace, but the ark of God is out there in a tent. Nathan replied to the king, go ahead and do whatever you have in mind, for the Lord is with you. Well, that sounds, like a man of God who is confirming something that God has revealed to David to do. But what Nathan then finds out, that night the Lord said to Nathan, go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord has declared. Are you the one to build a house for me to live in? I have never lived in a house from the day I brought the Israelites out of Egypt until this very day. I've always moved from one place to another with a tent and a tabernacle as my dwelling. Yet no matter wherever I have gone with the Israelites, I have never once complained to Israel's tribal leaders, the shepherds of my people Israel. I've never asked them, why haven't you built me a beautiful cedar house? Now go and say to my servant David, this is what the Lord of heaven's armies has declared. I took you from tending sheep into pasture and selected you to be a leader of my people Israel. I've been with you wherever you have gone, and I've destroyed all your enemies before your eyes. Now I will make your name as famous as anyone who has ever lived on the earth. And I will provide a homeland for my people Israel, planting them in a secure place where they will never be disturbed. Evil nations won't oppress them as they've done in the past. Starting from the time I appointed judges to rule my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Furthermore, the Lord declares that he will make a house for you. That's a twist. David wanted to build a house for the Lord, but God says, I'm going to make a house for you, a dynasty of kings. For when you die and are buried with your ancestors, I will raise up one of your descendants, your offspring, and I will make his kingdom strong. He is the one who will build a house, a temple for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. I will be his father, he will be my son. If he sins, I will correct and discipline him with the rod like any father would do. But my favor will not be taken from him as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from your sight. Your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever. That last sentence is the bottom line. Those who have studied prophecy have heard much about end time prophecy. We talk about Jesus being the heir to David's throne. That's an end time thing that most prophecy teachers will bring up, that that's when Jesus comes back to rule and reign. He will be sitting on the throne in Jerusalem, which is considered to be David's throne. And this whole passage may seem maybe insignificant to us in the day that we live in. But if you understand this, that where this idea of the throne of David comes in, you understand what the end time is about. So in Revelation, I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but John is told by Jesus that he is from the line of the tribe of Judah, which is the tribe that David was from, and he is the heir to David's throne. And that's in book of Revelation. So understanding that this has a direct connection to what God is making this covenant right now with David, that has a direct connection to the last days, to the very end of the last days. So remember that the people wanted a king, but God didn't want the people to have a king. Remember? They asked for a king, but it was not God's perfect will that they have a king. Who did he want to be their king? Himself. He was going to be their king. It was, when they asked, when the Israelite people asked Samuel to give them a king, God told Samuel, it's not you that they are rejecting as a prophet, it's me as their God that they're rejecting. And God, out of just wanting, I don't know why he did it, but he did give them a king because they asked for it. And he gave them a king that was not after his own heart. Saul was not a man after God's own heart. And it says that God says that he removed Saul from their presence and from their sight, and he replaced and put in that position of a king, position of kingship, with a man who did have his heart. As God saw in Abraham, what he wanted to create a nation out of, the characteristics, the qualities that Abraham had in him, God saw he could use that to create a nation. He saw in David what he wanted as a leader of his chosen people, a man who had his own heart, and it was a man after his own heart, that he would lead his people, his chosen people. They didn't need another king, but God let them have a king. And then God told David he would build a dynasty out of his children. Now, if you know the story well about how David's children behaved, so to speak, this dynasty didn't go without its problems. Solomon being the first one that was to follow David as king, and God selected Solomon. He even gave him his own name. I think it's like Jehoiada, named him. And God said that he's going to be the one that would build my temple. But it's that person who God gave to be the most wisest person that was on the planet. That man, that king, did not have the heart that his father had. And his heart was swayed by his wives. Out of disobedience, Solomon married many wives. And God had forbid for a king to have multiple wives. And so Solomon was later coerced or whatever to build temples for his foreign wives, and he ends up becoming a worshiper of false gods. Even Moloch, who they would kill their own children, sacrifice their own children. Solomon went this route. Solomon was the one who began the downfall of Israel, and that ends up being, after his reign, that the nation of Israel is divided into the northern and southern kingdoms. And the southern kingdom is the one we call Judah, and its capital is Jerusalem. And there was always a descendant of David on the throne in Jerusalem until 586 BC, when Israel, which is in the middle of the board there, when Israel was defeated by King Nebuchadnezzar. So I want to tie all that together to the last step with the last days into the Old Testament. And to do that, I'm going to read several Old Testament prophecies. Now, the first one that came to my mind was the one that had to do with King Nebuchadnezzar. When the Israelites were captured by the Babylonians, there was only about 10,000 Israelites that had survived and that were taken to Babylon. That's a very small number considering how many left Egypt. If you consider 2.5 million approximately left Egypt, and there's only about 10,000. There were some that were left to tend the vineyards and tend the crops in Israel, but only about 10,000 were actually taken to Babylon for the 70 years of captivity. But while there, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and I'm just reminding you of this dream because it does set the stage for where we're going with the governments of mankind. This is Daniel chapter 2, beginning at verse 31. King Nebuchadnezzar's had this dream. No one can interpret it for him. And Daniel then is given the interpretation by God. In your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you a huge shining statue of a man. It was a frightening sight. The head of the statue was made of fine gold. Anybody remember who that represented? What king? Nebuchadnezzar. So what he is dreaming begins with him as being the king that was powerful, and the gold represents the value. Its chest and arms were silver. This represents the Medo-Persian Empire that defeated the the Babylonian Empire. Its belly and thighs were bronze. This represents the Grecian Empire that defeated the Medo-Persian. Anybody remember the name in history, the guy from Greece that was very powerful? Alexander the Great. Yes. Its legs were iron and its feet were a combination of iron and baked clay. This is the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire ends up imploding on itself. It was never defeated by an outside force. It just imploded because of how corrupt it had become. Verse 34, as you watched, a rock was cut from a mountain and not by human hands. It struck the feet of iron and clay, meaning the Roman Empire. It struck the feet of iron and clay, smashing them to bits. The whole statue was crushed into small pieces of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold. Then the wind blew them away without a trace, like chaff on the threshing floor. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. That was a dream. Now I'll tell you what it means. Your Majesty, you are the greatest of kings. The God of heaven has given you sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. He has made you the ruler over all the inhabited world, and has put even the wild animals and birds under your control. You are the head of gold, but after your kingdom comes to an end, another kingdom inferior to yours will rise up and take your place. And so on, as they all end up being defeated. 44 says, during the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed or conquered. It will crush all these kingdoms into nothingness, and it will stand forever. The meaning of the rock cut from the mountain, though not by human hands, that crushed the pieces of the statue of iron, bronze, silver, and gold, the great God was showing the king what will happen in the future. The dream is true, and meaning is certain. So God is revealing to a pagan, he didn't really reveal it to Daniel, although he will, after this, reveal to Daniel through dreams and visions several things concerning the last days. But God is revealing it to Daniel also through the dream that he gave to Nebuchadnezzar. And so Nebuchadnezzar is seeing that all human governments will one day fail. That's what the dream reveals. That human governments will all fail and fall. And that the last government that will be upon this earth will be one that God creates and sets up. And that will be during which time? Millennium. So at the millennium, after the second coming of Jesus, there will be an earthly reign of Jesus Christ. That will be the rock that was cut out of the mountain, not by human hands. That Jesus will rule and reign. Who will be ruling and reigning with him? Church. All believers will be. Jews will be as well, because they will become believers after Jesus saves them during the Battle of Armageddon when he comes back. All right, so we're going to pick up later on the other things that Daniel sees through dreams and visions. They're very pertinent. In fact, he gets more information concerning some of the last day events and what the book of Revelation does. We have to work those together. So the very first prediction, I'm sure some of you know this, what was the very first prediction of one with a capital O, of one that would come in the future, meaning one from God? Where do we find the first scripture related to that? Okay. Due to time, I'll answer it. Genesis 3:15. So right after they have sinned in the garden, then God then is pronouncing curse upon the man, the woman, and the serpent. And when he gets to the serpent, he says this, and I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. This is prophetic in nature, although it's God himself saying it. It is God saying that one day there will be one who comes along who will defeat you. Because Satan at this point has gained rulership of this world. Remember that. This is how this plays into the last days. When Adam and Eve sinned, they relinquished their authority and dominion over God's creation. Satan tricked them and got that position, and he's the God of this world. And God is telling them one day, there's one that I'm going to send that will crush your head. And he will be the one who ends up being the one who reigns over this world. The second mention in the Old Testament is found in Genesis 49. It's when Jacob, if you remember when Jacob was in the last days of his life, he calls all of his sons to him to bless them, and he prophesies over each one of them, telling them what will lie ahead of them and their descendants in the future. And when he gets to his son Judah, he says, this is verse 10 of chapter 49, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will honor. Speaking of Jesus Christ at this point, in the scepter, that he would be the ruler. They said that all the kings would come through Judah, which is the tribe that David was from. So then that is what was intended until the split. There we have other people who become kings. That after after Solomon died, Rehoboam takes over, but Jeroboam, who was not of David's lineage, he ends up ruling over the northern kingdom after they split. That's a sad story. You look at this people that God chose as his own people to be just the most precious people, to show the world how great God is. That was the purpose of being created. And they ended up fighting and warring against each other, killing each other. I mean, sounds like the church, doesn't it? Not this church. I'm just saying the church in general. It's been said that the church is the only group of people that kill their wounded. So
wasn't that because of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, what they did and messed up, and then they kind of fought each other and killed off the group?
They were mad. The other tribes were mad because they had pretty well destroyed them.
Popular today.
Yeah. Now, though it says that they will come from Judah, that's where I mentioned Revelation 5, where it says that Jesus is the line of the tribe of Judah, and he is the heir to David's throne. Now, another mention, and this is always an interesting story to me when we get through it in our daily reading every year, is the story of Balaam. But Balaam also prophesies about the one that will come. And this is Numbers 24, verse 17. I see him, but not here and now. I perceive him, but far in the distant future. A star will rise from Jacob, a scepter will emerge from Israel. This is also God speaking through this man, this seer. He wasn't really a prophet of God. He wasn't a Jew. He was just someone who had the ability to predict just like Nostradamus has actually been one who has predicted things accurately in the past. Balaam had the ability to do things like this, not through the power of God, but through actually the power of Satan. But he is not allowed to speak the curse that King Balak had asked Balaam to come pronounce a curse upon Israel, because he feared them. They were such a mighty group of people, and Balaam couldn't curse them. He could only bless them. And then there's another whole story to that, which is very interesting, how that goes. And then Isaiah, one that we're more familiar with, maybe some passages in Isaiah concerning the one that would come. And this first one, and the one I want to hang on to today, is Isaiah 9. Very, very familiar. You know, the Jews, Isaiah was one of the ones that, the books of prophets, that they really, held on to and studied, because he gave so much in his prophecies. This is Isaiah 9, beginning in verse 2. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in the land of deep darkness, a light will shine. You will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice. They will rejoice before you, as people rejoice at the harvest, and like warriors dividing the plunder. For you, listen close, because this is going to tell you why the Jews were looking for this deliverer. Okay? For you will break the yoke of their slavery and lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. You will break the oppressor's rod, just as you did when you destroyed the army of Midian. The boots of the warrior and the uniforms bloodstained by war will all be burned. They will be fuel for the fire. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders during the millennium. Okay? And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will never end. He will rule with fairness and with justice from the throne of his ancestor, David. Here it comes up again, that he is coming from the line of the ancestor David. He will rule for all eternity. The passionate commitment of the Lord of Heaven's armies will make this happen. So Isaiah has told the Jews way back then that God is going to send one who's going to deliver you from the oppression that you're going to be living under. Because in 586 BC, and Isaiah was alive during the captivity, during this time, right prior to it. And he is telling there will be deliverance that comes, even though you're losing your national identity, even though you're going to be taken into captivity. One will come later that will free you from this oppression, and he will set up his kingdom, and he will rule with fairness, and he will remove all war from you. He'll be the Prince of Peace, basically.
Even though they're not a religious nation, they still honor Isaiah. That was the only book that was found intact. And if you go to the Museum of the Word, it's in a glass case that goes in a complete circle around a room, and the whole scroll is unrolled so you can read it.
Cool.
It's moving to know that was the book.
Yeah. Yeah, when Jesus got up to pronounce that his ministry was starting, he read from the book of Isaiah and said, this day this has been fulfilled. They knew Isaiah was kind of their go-to book as far as the Jews in that day. And they were looking for this person to come, this deliverer, this Messiah to come. Micah, book of Micah, a little known book for a lot of people. But chapter 5, verses 2 through 5, very familiar passage, especially at Christmas time. But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, are only a small village among the people of Judah, yet a ruler of Israel, whose origins are in the distant past, will come from you on my behalf. The people of Israel will be abandoned to their enemies until the woman in labor gives birth. Who is that? Mary. We're going to bring her up again shortly. Then at last his fellow countrymen will return from exile to their own land, and he will stand to lead his flock with the Lord's strength and the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Then his people will live there undisturbed, for he will be highly honored around the world, and he will be the source of peace. So this is another prediction that they were aware of, a prophecy, and they were looking for this to happen in their day, in the day that Jesus actually was born. Another prophet that's famous for some end-time prophecies is Ezekiel. And I'm just going to cover one today. This is chapter 21. and give them this message of the sovereign Lord. I will gather the people of Israel from among the nations. I will bring them home to their own land from the places where they have been scattered. I will unify them into one nation on the mountains of Israel. One king will rule them all. No longer will they be divided into two nations or into two kingdoms. They will never again pollute themselves with their idols and vile images and rebellion. For I will save them from their sinful apostasy. I will cleanse them. They will truly be my people, and I will be their God. That hasn't yet happened yet. My servant David will be their king. Is it really David? It's from David's dynasty. They will have only one shepherd. They will obey all my regulations, be careful to keep my decrees. They will live in the land I gave my servant Jacob, the land where their ancestors lived. They and their children, their grandchildren after them will live there forever, generation after generation. And my servant David will be their prince forever. And I will make a covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant. I will give them their land, increase their numbers, and I'll put my temple among them forever. That temple is yet to be built. This is what they call the third temple. I will make my home among them. When will that happen? When New Jerusalem comes down from God out of heaven at the end of the millennium. And we will read about that in Revelation. And when my temple is among them forever, the nations will know that I am the Lord who makes Israel holy. This is what God wanted when he called Abram. This was the purpose. That line right there. Then the world will know that I am the Lord who makes Israel holy. They didn't live up to it when they were given the opportunity when God called them. And then Zechariah, he prophesies concerning the triumphal entry